We all know we are currently experiencing a health crisis in modern day USA and have been for decades at this point. So, this is part one in a three-part series where we will be discussing that it is next to impossible to be completely healthy in our current society. Let's get into it. I'm going to put a few numbers up here on the screen just to kind of kick off our discussion. "12% of US adults are considered physically healthy. 75% are considered overweight or obese. 1 in 5 children suffer from childhood obesity, and genetics do play into it, but just right around 40%. How have we gotten to this point where all of these numbers are so applicable? In my humble and well-researched opinion, it started with this right here, the infamous food pyramid. I came across a video that I just had to share because it goes into detail about what brought the food pyramid on.
So g'day, I'm Dr. Paul Mason, and you might think that what you're looking at here is a work of science. That back in the 1970s, scientists without vested interests methodically reviewed the science to determine the healthiest diet, and then presented this to the public. Unsurprisingly, this didn't actually happen. Most of us are acutely aware that science and politics shouldn't mix, and yet they're inseparable. The fact is, when we mix science with politics, we get politics, and the food pyramid is a product of politics. The backdrop to the story of the food pyramid begins in post-war 1950s America. Deaths from competing causes, namely war and infection, had drastically reduced. And at the same time, rates of smoking were increasing. As a result, heart disease rapidly became the leading cause of death. And on this backdrop, in 1955, President Dwight D. Eisenhower suffered a heart attack. He was out playing golf in Denver when he felt what he thought was an episode of indigestion from a hamburger. And later that night, he woke with severe chest pain. So his personal physician, not realizing he was having a heart attack, gave him several shots of morphine and sent him back to sleep. It was only after an ECG was performed after he awoke at 1 p.m. the next afternoon that it was understood that he had in fact had a heart attack. This was major news which struck a nerve with the US population. The life of their leader, due for re-election, was on a knife's edge. With heart disease, the new leading cause of death, the American population was gripped by fear. So the hunt was on for the root cause of this deadly scourge. Unfortunately, scientists of the day didn't seem to pay too much attention to Eisenhower's heavy smoking, reported to up to 4 packets a day. Indeed, this was in an age when doctors themselves promoted smoking. Rather, the scourge of heart disease was attributed to dietary saturated fat. And if you're a plumber, this might make sense. After all, pouring fat down a sink can block a drain. For the rest of us, however, realize that our physiology does not resemble that of a kitchen sink. Which begs the question, how on earth did these scientists in the 1950s come to the conclusion that saturated fat was the cause of heart disease? An ancient food consumed for millennia being blamed for a modern disease. In his first term, Richard Nixon's government had agreed to sell millions of bushels of grain to the Soviet Union. Unfortunately, there was a particularly poor growing season, which resulted in a spike in the prices of grain. So to minimise public disquiet, the Department of Agriculture unleashed a suite of policies designed to increase grain production, and they worked. Before long, there were massive surpluses of grain. About the same time, this lady, Louise Light, was in charge of a team responsible for crafting the US dietary guidelines. This process, unfortunately, was informed both by the unsound science within the dietary goals that came from the Select Committee and her masters within the USDA. It seems as though the new dietary guidelines were seen as a vehicle by those within the USDA to deal with their problem of the grain surplus. Consistent with Ansel Keys' fear of saturated fat, Light's team initially recommended to their masters within the USDA that there be a recommended daily intake of 3 to 4 servings of whole grain breads and cereals per day. Some, however, this recommendation for 3 to 4 serves a day, after it went through the senior bureaucrats within the USDA, increased to an extraordinary 6 to 11 serves.
Which is what we used for almost 2 decades. Not just that either. You know, when politics are involved, as he stated, it just takes over completely. And you can't have politics without money.
And I think what's come out is this collusion between the food industry and those who architect our dietary guidelines. I mean, the 2020 Dietary Guidelines for Americans Committee had 95% of individuals on that committee had ties with Big Pharma and Big Food. These guidelines tend to be rife with conflicts of interest, with industry. And I think it's like, it doesn't take somebody with a nutrition PhD to look at grains and to say, like, what actually is in a grain that makes them essential for good health? And then you take these grains and you refine them and use them to create these ultra processed products with added sugars and emulsifiers and the like. And that, I think, is at the hallmark of the standard American diet, which we know drives disease.
95% of the people who are determining what we should eat are somehow tied up with Big Pharma and Big Food. How is that even allowed? It's not backed by science. It's not laid out and well researched. It is literally bought by Big Pharma and Big Food. The food pyramid was replaced by My Pyramid in 2011. My Pyramid was just a very vague explanation of the portions that you should be eating of each food category, equally as unhelpful. But then how do we decide what we should be eating? Everywhere we look on any social media, when we go to the doctors, we hear all kinds of different opinions. What you should be eating, what you shouldn't be eating. I came across this TikTok that put it so well.
Also, only eat breakfast and dinner and walk. Also, eat lots of protein and lift, and actually don't do any cardio, it's bad for your joints. Also, don't eat too much protein and make sure you're sleeping a lot, but don't be sedentary. But don't be too active, it's bad for your blood pressure. Make sure you replace all your lost salt, but never eat too much sodium. It's easy, just eat vegetables. But don't eat potatoes or corn. Fruit is obviously good for you, and also it's all sugar and it's bad for you. Sugar, I forgot to mention, is a vital source of quick burning carbohydrates that your brain needs to survive, and you should avoid it at all costs. Protein is hurting your kidneys. Make sure you eat a lot of it. Drink water. Never starve yourself. Unless you're calling it intermittent fasting, and then it's okay to starve yourself. Don't overhydrate. Being vegan is obviously the healthiest lifestyle, and also no, it's not. Fish is obviously super good for you, and it's full of mercury and killing you. Simple, right?
Simple, right? It is the complete opposite. Diet is 100% something that should be personalized to each individual, depending on your lifestyle and your budget, and numerous factors play into the food that you eat. Even researching it comes up with so many contradictions. I came across 2 pieces of information because I was just testing it, because as Dr. Paul said in his video, saturated fat was introduced as the most harmful aspect of a diet, and that is, what causes heart attacks and heart disease. And I know, based on my own research into my own food and diet, that saturated fat in moderation is not bad for you. It is actually good for you. But that can be said of any food, regardless of the nutrients or the healthiness of a food. If you eat it in moderation, it is okay. What's not okay, and what is leading to those staggering statistics that we saw at the beginning of the video, is we constantly, as modern day USA, are overeating, are overindulging, are eating because we're stressed or we're sad or we're happy. Whatever the case, food has become what we turn to. I came across 2 articles specifically about saturated fats, one of which demonized them. Study explains why food high in saturated fat may lead to plaque buildup in arteries. Thankfully, though, research also points to a drug that could block the negative effects of a high-fat diet. So don't you worry, they've got a drug for you. However, the study suggests that consuming food rich in saturated fat and choline, a nutrient found in red meat, eggs, and dairy products, increases the number of metabolites that builds plaque in the arteries. But I've heard recently quite a few positive things about choline, so I did what I do and I Googled it as well. And this is what I found. You get choline, like the first study mentions, from animal and plant-based foods, including eggs and shiitake mushrooms. Choline is a nutrient needed for many bodily functions, including metabolism, neurotransmitter synthesis, brain development, and more. Even a specific amount that we're supposed to be getting each day, and 90% of the US population is not getting the recommended intake. And for those of you wanting to have kids, or if you're pregnant, choline is important for fetal growth and development, and the need for it increases during pregnancy and breastfeeding. And there's so many contradictions about whether eggs are healthy for you, which blows my mind, because yes, they are healthy for you unless you have an allergy or some specific diet restricting you from eating them. And choline is mainly concentrated in the yolk. Again, eggs is just one other example of how controversial our current society has become. I'm not saying I have all of the solutions to the current health crisis in America. I do know that we need to eat more nutritious. We need to bring our overall average BMI down, because that is what obesity is. Overweight and obesity is directly tied to your BMI. So doctors like this one from Stanford University, with so many credentials after her name, I want you to recognize that obesity is a disease. Absolutely, it sure is. A fatal disease. I want you to know that obesity is no one's fault. How can that even be? We all feed ourselves. We go to the grocery stores, we shop for ourselves, except again, for kids. And then it is on whoever is buying the food for them to make sure that they are eating nutritious food. I am very grateful, though, that our incoming health secretary, RFK Jr., is so focused on making our country healthier again, as opposed to our previous health secretary who was not healthy in any way, shape, or form. We'll just leave it at that. So good changes, good positive changes should be coming. We just all need to embrace the changes that come. We need to research what our macronutrients and caloric intake should be for whatever our goal is, because obesity should not be a major cause of death in the United States. I can't be convinced that people enjoy being overweight and obese. It is a very difficult life. People can spout about body positivity all day, every day. But in reality, there is a such thing as a healthy weight for each person. It will vary from person to person, but find out what a healthy BMI is for you personally and do all you can to achieve it. Change your diet. Invest in your health. Invest in your quality of life, because you cannot convince me that it is pleasant to be overweight or obese. I see it all the time. Nothing about it is appealing. Stop eating the sugar. Eat things in moderation. You don't have to be so strict that you completely cut out certain foods, but you should limit certain foods, absolutely, especially those with sugar, ultra-processed, fast food. You can still have those, but they shouldn't make up the majority of your diet. And it's not going to be easy, but it will pay off in the long run. So find out what your healthy BMI is and work towards that. Your diet makes up so much of your quality of life. Wouldn't you want a better quality of life, a healthier quality of life? Don't just go with what you see on TikTok or YouTube. Do the research yourself. Look into it for yourself, because it will be different for everyone. And that's just my 2 cents.